Good evening, everyone. Buonasera, welcome. Welcome back to the American Academy in Rome. Io sono Elisabeth Rodini, Interim Director, e sono onorata di darvi il benvenuto stasera. I'm really grateful to be here with all of you tonight. Is it too much to say that we gathered here in this paradiso of a villa are making our way to an opening through the selva oscura, the dark woods that Dante so vividly connotes in the opening stanza of the Divina Commedia, that we are now, at last, seeing a bit of light in the clearing of this most difficult year and a half of pandemic. Dante Alighieri, the subject of our conversation tonight, certainly understood how frightful plagues can be, how they shake us into awareness of the frailty of life and our everyday, forcing us to rethink and reimagine our world. Who of us really understood this until the cold winter of 2020? And what about the challenges that this long year going on too has presented us? Among these are deep ethical preoccupations about equity and justice, about personal sacrifice and the collective good, about truth and trust. Our theme this year at the American Academy in Rome is, in fact, ethics. So it is fortuitous that this year is also the year of Dante, the 700th anniversary of his death in 1321. It's fortuitous because few writers have grappled so consistently and movingly with the ethical challenges of their day: power, wealth, greed, corruption, as well as grace and self-recognition. These are the same challenges we face in our own age and the virtues we draw on in confronting them. This evening, we're going to hear from three individuals whom I will present to you shortly about Dante, his Divine Comedy, and its significance now. The conversation will center on a new documentary film by Ric Burns, one of the panelists, and will consider, among other questions, the relevance of Dante in 2021. For Italians, Dante is a household name. Still today, many can quote his verse by heart, and references to selve oscure are part of the vernacular. Americans, on the other hand, may know Dante by name, but the outlines of his work may be vague at best. 7 or so years ago, Ric Burns and his scholarly partner, Riccardo Bruscagli, set out on a journey to fill in those gaps. Along the way, they thought long and hard about why, in the dark woods of the 21st century, Dante continues to inspire admiration and controversy. Burns's film Dante is premiering on Rai Television this month, and it will air on PBS in a longer English version next spring. We are thrilled to have this chance to preview it and to learn about the hows and whys of its making. I want to thank the Helen Frankenthaler Foundation for its support of the Academy's conversation series, of which this is a part, and to acknowledge our former director, Avinoam Shalem, who conceived of this program and set it into motion. Before moving to brief introductions, I'd like to ask you, please, to be sure your telephones are silenced and also to keep your masks on, cellulari spenti e mascherine su, per favore. So Ric Burns is an award-winning documentary filmmaker best known for his 8-part series on the history of New York. Over the past 30 years, he has explored the complex dynamics of the American experience, from the Donner Party and the Pilgrims through his most recent films, Oliver Sacks' His Own Life and Driving While Black. Riccardo Bruscagli is a professor emeritus of Italian literature at the University of Florence, whose scholarly work has focused on the Renaissance and more recently, Dante. He acted as scholarly advisor to and co-writer of this film. And writer Jonathan Levi, most recently of the novel Septimania, has his own history with the Divine Comedy, having produced the theatrical adaptation of Poet Laureate Robert Pinsky's translation of the Inferno of Dante that toured the United States in 1997. I hope that you will enjoy their conversation. I thank them very much for being here and sharing their work with us. And I invite you all to stay afterwards for a reception on our beautiful terrace to celebrate this much anticipated gathering. Grazie.
Is this working here? Yeah. You know, in addition to all of the various artistic and scholarly reasons that we're here to celebrate Dante, For me, it's a tremendous personal pleasure to be here at the Academy. 21 years ago, I was up here with Robert Pinsky. We had done an adaptation of the Inferno of Dante that toured the United States and did a performance of part of that here at the Academy. So it feels like it's made. But more importantly, I've known this man for about 35 years. We've been close friends for that time. So I've gotten to see how they're having trouble hearing in the back. I'll speak a little bit about that. And we've known each other for the better part of 35 years.
43.
43 years. I guess that's the better part of it. We both had a lot more hair back in those days. And it was back in the days when I first okay. Grazie. Okay, as I was saying, I've known Rick for 43 years. I won't make mistakes. And so I've known him since before he became a filmmaker. In fact, Rick was the bright shining star in the eye of the scholar Edward Said as a graduate student at Columbia University, which is all by way of saying that I won't go through the entire filmography of his work, but that it started with a film that he made, a series he made with his brother Ken Burns on the Civil War, and then progressed. And what I would say is that the wonderful thing about Rick's films is that they have the kind of intellectual quality that you would expect of a student of Edward Said, while at the same time communicating much of the time the American experience to a general public. And this has only grown and expanded. And so I was delighted when, was it 7 years ago that you started to work together? When 7 years ago, Rick said to me that he was going to be making a documentary on Dante. And of course I knew, 7 years was probably the short version of how long that would take on that road. But so this is a personal pleasure that when Avi Noam came to me last January and said, 700th anniversary of the death of Dante, do you have any ideas of something special that we can do up at the Academy? I said, well, let me tell you about my friend Rick. So this is one of the things that my experience with the Academy has been, is that through these types of conversations with people, things can happen. And that the kind of, not just networking, but introductions that you make in through there, and getting to know Elizabeth and bringing her into this fold as we planned this was a tremendous pleasure. But the most recent pleasure was just an hour ago when I met Riccardo Bruscagli, who came down from Florence with his wife Christine, who I only know by reputation and having seen little bits and pieces of him on the clips that I've seen of their film. But in the course of, I believe that this is the beginning of at least a 7-year relationship with Riccardo. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you, John. It's wonderful to be here.
Now, what we're going to do tonight, what we have is we have a very special occasion. And I'm going to ask Rick to describe a little bit what this is, but he sent us down 3 clips from the documentary. And when we were teching this a little bit earlier with the 2 wonderful technicians, both named Stefano here, and they put it up on the screen, it was the first time that Rick had seen these clips in a theatrical type of setting like this. And it's one of those moments, not just among friends, but where he went like this, where you have that moment of recognition of something. So this is a very special occasion, I think, also for all of you to see this. So tell me about these clips. Where are they in the process for you, Rick?
Where in terms of what we're doing with the film?
What you're doing with the film, yeah.
So we, first of all, it's a project that really began with Riccardo and his wife, Christine, who's here, who Riccardo had very much wanted to be involved with making an English language version of Dante available for the world. And although he looks much younger than me, he's now a professor emeritus. And he's been working, so it's really his project, and I'm humbled and happy to be along for the ride. And we have been thinking about it and talking about it for a very long time and doing interviews and doing reenactments. One wonderful thing about Dante is that all his work, he's a featured player in all his work, so that it opened up the possibility of doing reenactments, not just of him sitting at a table scribbling, which we do enough of, but of him in various places in his poetry and in the Prosa Metrum Vita Nuova. So that the film that we decided to make, and that we felt is the right way to go about it, is a film that intertwines the story of Dante's life and times, turbulent and tumultuous and hair-raising as they are. The story inside his literature, primarily Vita Nuova, and then of course, really primarily the comedy. And those two stories themselves intertwined with what we call somewhat sort of abstractly the story of the text. Where the hell did this thing come from? You know, what kind of precursors were it? What was it based on? How did he kind of come to think about it? What form did it take? How the hell did he write it? You know, in the 15 years of exile, which was essentially kind of a death sentence in the early 14th century. So he wrote this poem of inconceivable stature under the worst possible circumstances. And then what was it, how has it been transmitted over time? And the story of that transmission is obviously key to Italian culture, to Italian political culture, linguistic culture, and to world culture. And so in telling those three stories, we very much wanted to, you know, we, with cunning originality, have divided our film into three parts. Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. That doesn't mean that those three parts are only about those three canticles. But each of them, the canticles are a part of each of those parts, but each part covers a massively important period in his life. The first from 1265 and before, when he was born, down through his exile and the conception of the Divine Comedy. The second, Purgatorio, is from roughly the time he finishes Inferno, Riccardo, 1308, 1309, we don't know, down to his death in 1321 in Ravenna, 700 years ago last week. And then the third part, Paradiso, takes place inside the text of the Canticle Paradiso, but all posthumously for Dante. So he gets to both be alive with Beatrice for the last 700 years, and also we find out what the fate of this text was, starting with Boccaccio, who really kind of was Dante's first great champion, hand wrote out 3 copies of the entire 14,233 line poem, wrote the first biography of Dante, and of course, in a scene that you'll see, which is his first clip, began to give lectures in the Badia in Florence about Dante, reciting Dante, trying to find out the meaning of Dante and spread the word about it. So that first clip is really the actor Alan Cox, who is Brian Cox's son, and is our Boccaccio and our sort of passionate Dante transmitter, and that's why he's in that first clip.
Great. Now, this first clip was also part of the Rai version that was shown last week, or
No.
is this? Okay, so what has been shown on Rai is sort of a teaser for what is eventually going to be the film.
It's a 3-hour sneak preview of a film that's still in construction. You know, I'm sorry to say for anyone who's Italian here, nobody outside Italy really cares that this is the 700th anniversary of his death in Ravenna. That does not really signify in a big way. It certainly didn't for public television. We intended to have the whole film done in America and here for this year, but we were filming on February 14th, 2020, in and around Florence. I hopped on a plane. We thought we had one more massive shoot. I came home on a Saturday, February 15th, 2020, and Milan exploded on February 19th. So the next time we were back in Italy to do key filming was 3 months ago. So we have our work still cut out for us, but meantime, Italy could not let go of the anniversary. So we created this kind of 3-hour version, which in many ways resembles the film, but in many ways is not yet the film that we'll finish making. But we're extremely proud and humbled to have been able to do so for the home team, as we did.
Well, let's look at the first clip, if we can, that features Boccaccio. Stefano sta qua con la prima clip? Sì, ok.
citizens of Florence, welcome to this sacred place. Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita, midway upon the journey of our life, etc. I have been tasked, good people of Florence, with giving an exposition on what is hidden beneath the poetic veil of our Dante's Divine Comedy. A divine comedy. It is fitting for a man to invoke the divinity at the beginning of a great enterprise. And, as is clear from the works of Plautus and Terence, a comedy is that which has a tumultuous beginning, but which ends in peace and tranquility. So it is with our Dante. Let us proceed.
Okay, Rick, you told us that that Boccaccio was the first one to lecture on Dante, but Riccardo, what attracted Boccaccio to Dante? I mean, they seem like polar opposites. I mean, you know, in my mind, it would be much more fun to be cooped up in a castle with Boccaccio telling dirty stories than to, you know, be with a depressive like Dante for, you know, during COVID.
Well, it was a new phase actually in Boccaccio's life. Boccaccio, after the plague and after the Decameron, went through a sort of conversion, literary and even personal. And actually, he wrote to his friend Petrarch saying, "What have I done in my youth? And I'm a different man, and maybe I should." And Petrarch said, "No, you know, I mean, you don't have to deny what you have done, but now it's time to become really an adult, a serious person." But it was not just that. The fact is that Boccaccio, when he came from Naples, and Boccaccio arrived in Florence after spending his youth in Naples, he never forgot Naples, actually. Mm-hmm. He tried many times to go back. He found already the city kind of haunted by the memory of Dante. And he embraced Dante. And he was the one who kind of dreamt of creating this duality at the beginning of our literature between Dante and Petrarch, and he felt invested in this kind of, how can I say, in this duty of like the younger brother, or that he had to promote these fathers or older brothers, and yes, he tried to recapture Dante into the memory and the tradition of Florence in many ways. Apparently, the Comune also sent him to Ravenna with a bunch of money to deliver to the daughter of Dante, who was a nun in Ravenna, Antonia, who had chosen the ominous name as a nun of Beatrice. So she was a Suor Beatrice. So he went there, apparently delivered this money. The Florence had tried to kind of repossess Dante. And in this process, I think that Boccaccio's attempt was one of the most serious, because it was not just, let's try to make Dante Florentine again, but let's try to expand his text and to transforming text into a communally shared memory of the city. It was the first time that secular text was exposed, was explained in church, like the Holy Scriptures, and in vernacular, and to everybody. So it was really a seminal point in the establishing of our early literary tradition in vernacular, and a seminal point of his promotion of the cult of Dante in a phase of his life where probably Decameron and his, as you said, not all of them dirty, but certainly provocative short stories kind of faded away from his horizon.
But he mentions, I mean, when he's talking about the Divine Comedy being a combination of the divine and then the Plautus and Terence, that you've got the sacred and the profane. was it the profane? I mean, is it incorrect to associate profane with vernacular? Was that the thing that Florence was most attracted to as far as Dante, was the way that he was writing great poetry in the language of the people? Or was there the sacred ethics that was?
I think it was both, if I might say. It was both because Dante could be read as a sacrato poema, but could be read also like the man who promoted the lingua di strada, really the language from the street, to a literary level. So Dante could be interpreted in a vast range of ways, and I think that Boccaccio understood that, even though his own range as a narrator was varied, but how can I say, narrower, and but he might have felt this affinity to an author who was so vastly varied and wanted to embrace really the basest expression and the most sublime expressions. And in that way, I think he understood deeply Dante and his affinity with Dante. What was pathetic is his effort to reconciliate Petrarch with Dante, without understanding that the way of Petrarch felt for the vernacular language and for poetry in general was so different from Dante's. And Petrarch had to say, well, wait a second, I mean, don't go there. I'm a different type of author.
I think that what Riccardo is trying to say is that this is the poem, the comedy, which has both farting devils in it and the most sublime and ineffable poetry that the Italian language has ever created. And that it was very much not like that he was sometimes going to be naughty and sometimes going to be sublimely nice, Dante, but that in fact he saw it was necessary to plumb the depths of the entire range of the human experience, that the vernacular was the way to do it, not Latin. Latin would not be able to reach the street, but it wasn't just the dirt on the street, it was also the experience that ordinary human beings, men and women, young and old, rich and poor, had in relationship to the world around them, that he wanted to create a text that ran the gamut. And I think in that respect, it's a text that, as such, we can recognize very much, that it is astonishing how details, not necessarily all of them having to do with farting devils, but rather, when he describes meeting someone in purgatory who comes up to him on one of the lower terraces, he and Virgil, and squints at him the way a tailor squints through the eye of a needle that he's trying to thread. There's always this profoundly concrete and immediately, and this is crucial, visualizable way of seeing things. So it's not just the lingua franca of the language, which it is, it's also the lingua franca of a visuality, which actually is the lingua franca of communication, which doesn't, there is no language coded for vision. We all see the same, even if we all speak different languages. And in that respect, as a filmmaker, and I wouldn't be the first to say this, but the startling visuality of Dante from the very beginning to the very end is mind-boggling. And I also want to point out, before we leave Boccaccio behind, but I want to leave him behind completely, it was Boccaccio who gave the poem the title, The Divine Comedy. Dante called it the Commedia. And in fact, in this text, and texts like it, when he said, Dante's Divine Comedy, it was the first time those words were phrased. And then
I remember the moment, I think we were having breakfast on Broadway, where you came back, and I'm sure it was after discussing it with Riccardo, where you told me that you had this idea of bringing Boccaccio in as a character, and that this was a tremendous sort of discovery of a way to make a film about Dante.
Well, we have to, and I'll tell you why. There's a very homely reason why, which is that our Dante in this film is this extraordinary Florentine kid in his 50s, Antonio Fazzini, who's a remarkable actor and an old friend of Riccardo and Christine's. And he looks exactly like Dante. I mean, Yeats once described Dante in Ego Dominus Tuus, the Yeats poem taken from the phrase, I am your Lord in Vita Nova, as sort of hollow-cheeked, And that Dante was able to make that hollow-cheeked visage so familiar by knowing himself that his face became a face second only to Christ in terms of its familiarity around the world. And, you know, once you see and meet Antonio Fantini, you go, he's Dante. And he speaks Florentine Italian. So he's able to speak the high language. He speaks English fluently and with an Italian accent. We can't have Dante all the time having an Italian accent. And we puzzled over, how could we do this? How could we have it both ways?
Mhm.
And the way we have it both ways is we have two people transmitting our Dante. Dante himself, particularly when Dante in the poem is having interactions with people that he meets. But when it's more just the poetry of the poem itself, Alan Cox, who has this extraordinary training, as you know, in the classics of English literature and in Shakespeare, brings it alive in his own way. But then there's also the further reason that he plays this crucial role in transmitting the story of the text. So that's how we kind of got to that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, let's show you this actor who plays Dante now. Possiamo fare clip numero 2.
Numero 2 is Riccardo. Riccardo speaking.
That's right, but we see the face of.
Oh, we do indeed.
We do see the.
It's possible, yeah.
In the end, it is perhaps above all a story of loss and renewal, sin and redemption, of exile and trying to go home. A story of faith and love, how they fail and falter, and how they may be restored, and of the soaring and redemptive truths that come from communion with something larger than oneself, the contours of which are not always easily to be discerned. It is also a story haunted from start to finish by the deep and abiding human mystery that attaches to the fact that often the only way to go home again is to be willing to leave it behind forever.
Why should we care about Dante Alighieri? After all, he's so far away, so remote from us. 7 centuries separate us from him. Our universe is different, our cosmology is different, our science is different, our religion is different. So why should we care about Dante? Because Dante addresses the core of our humanity. Dante had the ambition of embracing everything, of embracing the sense of us being humans on this planet. What you immediately understand reading the Divine Comedy is that, okay, that was the life of Dante Alighieri 700 years ago. But the message is, your life matters. Take care of it. Take care of it. Your life matters.
No, you know, I love that. I've watched that clip a number of times, Riccardo, and the sense of what it means to be human. But every time I think about it, I want to ask you the question. Finally, I can. What does it mean to be human? Oh,
that is very timely. I was yesterday.
wait a second until they stop.
Citizens of Florence, welcome to this.
We'll get the reruns next week, okay?
No, from a nearby church. I was talking yesterday up in Lago Maggiore with the students of a school, large school of students, and we're talking about the same thing. What do I mean when your life matters? I was telling those kids, I know you are kind of struggling through the text of the Divine Comedy. Why? Because it's so full of names, so full of places, so full of references to history that you don't know. Who knows today who was Bocca degli Abati? Who knows? But is it truly important at a first level of reading and understanding Dante to know who those characters were, who those places were, where they were? what you sense, even though you don't know the specificity of those references, is that you are dealing with the life of a very specific man, of a very specific human being in a very specific window of time. And that human being was so invested with the specificity and the details of his life in that window of time. And so the message is that we are kind of pushed into do the same with our lives. Do the same with our lives. We have our Bocca degli Abati, we have our names, we have our memories, we have our places. And this is the opportunity that is given to us as human beings to make sense of it and to give sense of this only life that you have to live. And this is, I think, is so shocking when you read Dante. Who cares? I mean, do you really want to know all the names of the lords of Romagna that he mentions? It's obvious that you need endless footnotes for that. And they are useful at a certain level of studying, and you need to know, you must know who they were. But I think that Dante survived 700 years because even though you don't know the names of those lords of Romagna, it is clear what they meant for Dante, how much of his interest in politics and the human life and the life of community, how much they represented for him. And he is contagious in this way. It is a very contagious text in that way.
How invested do you have to be, however, in the world of Dante, not perhaps the lords of Romagna, but in Catholicism? I mean, that the world, what it meant to be human in 1300 in Italy meant to be Catholic.
I don't think that that's the point. You know, I think that very related to everything, Riccardo, you were just saying, is that one of the seeming but not actual paradoxes of the Divine Comedy is that here's a work of enormous sprawl and structure set, except for the opening canto, in the afterworld, and it's all about this world. And the point is that people are not being punished in these or rewarded in Inferno, Purgatorio, or Paradiso. They are, each of these places throws into high relief exactly who they were in life. So it is as if a particularly graphic, indelible photograph, unchanging in the case of those in hell, is being provided. So when Francesca and Paolo roll around, these were choices made, and by the way, they're not being punished for it. They chose this. They chose to submit to the tempest of love and lust. And that is why they're there. So they're not being punished by God, Dante, or anyone else. It is a very vivid, concrete realization of who they were in life. So it's like real life writ large. And purgatory is very much the same, although there are possibilities of changing.
Except Rick, I mean, it's Dante choosing to include these people in there. I mean, it's a little bit as if he's the one who's got the Twitter account and he's canceling Paolo and Francesca.
Your life matters, which is to say it has consequences. And there are going to be consequences, and there are moral consequences. And the point may or may not be that there are moral consequences in the afterlife. More to the point, there are consequences in this life on everyone affected by your behavior. So however much you seem to be guided towards the afterlife and some reward and hopefully some lack of punishment, the real emphasis is the great philologist and arguably one of the greatest literary scholars who ever lived, Erich Auerbach, said. It is about, he is the poet of the secular world, the poet of the real world, and was astonishingly innovative because this text is in some sense important only insofar as it is about this life. And that's why you don't need to be a Catholic. You can be, as I am, a long since lapsed Episcopalian from a family of scientists, and have been an atheist all my life, and only discovered tragically when I was 16 years old that most Americans still believe in God. What a dope I am and was. But, you know, so I'm a complete lifelong atheist from a family of atheists. I find Dante inspiring, deeply moving, like profoundly instructive at every conceivable level. So I think all you need to do is have a desire to be in touch with something larger than yourself, and have some desire to have a sense that your life has meaning and there are consequences to your action. If you are in that category of people, which I have discovered is almost all human beings, you will find yourself paid and repaid exponentially for spending as much time with this text as you possibly can. And the deeper you go into it, the more revelatory it is about human frailty, about human hope, about the desire to be connected, about family, about the death of your parents, about children. I mean, it's in this, like, I don't need to argue about it with this, but I think that, you know, it doesn't mean that it's not in some sense a Catholic text, but, you know, he was essentially spurned by Pope after Pope after Pope because he hated the popes.
And he put a lot of them in the Inferno.
Well, and which is because
There is
they-
not one pope in paradise. There
They're
is
not.
not one pope in
They're
paradise.
not. I mean, it's filled, Inferno is filled with clerics because he was deeply concerned. If you hold office, including the highest office, that increases your moral responsibility. And you cannot use that power to therefore do things and find yourself somehow absolved from the consequences of that. You know what, Pope Mother freaking Boniface? Your life matters. And it's not only that you consigned me to the oblivion of exile, you know, in 1302 by helping with the French to bring the Blackwells back into power, which he did, but that, you know, that he found Boniface absolutely a paradigm of that kind of cleric, the highest in this case, who is abusing his power. And so you find that, you know, the church, Dante wrote the Monarchia while he was also in exile, which is a passionate, you know, argument that there has to be a permanent separation of church and state, the two suns that shine on our world, the sun of the church and the sun of the empire. They must never be in contact. And this predatory kind of like, you know, breaking of boundaries that the church had been engaged in for a very long time. So the spiritual life was stealing the power of the secular life, was in one of the ways, one of the things Dante found absolutely corrupted. So, I mean, you know, he was he's not a, you know, he became later a happy son of the church, but he was often virtually excommunicated.
On the other side, Riccardo.
No, I was about to say that I came to Dante. Let me say a little bit of the story. I came to Dante because I was invited by a great philologist in the University of Florence, a real Dantista, to introduce certain recitals of actors at the Teatro della Pergola who would recite Dante. And so from the very beginning, I approached Dante not from an academic, a purely academic point of view, but from a more, I can say, approachable point of view. I had an audience in front of me, and you have this wonderful word in English, relatable. I had to make him relatable to the people in front of me, whereas when I would write about Ariosto, I mean, I have 25 scholars who will write what I. And so from the very beginning, this urgency of sharing the deep significance of this author for the lives of people in front of me was upon my shoulders. And there are so many, and this is why my wife insisted so much that I would share with the even more, you know, wider and more global audience this way of approaching Dante. But so I was forced into finding a lot of points of a possible relation between our lives and Dante. And I would add something to what Rick was saying, specifically, for example, about purgatory. Purgatory is an invention of Dante in many ways, in a theological way, in a topographical way, in a moral way. And maybe only us today can understand the audacity of that invention. Because purgatory, I mean, who goes to purgatory? Not the good ones, but those who changed their lives, who repented in Catholic terms, who at a certain point were not satisfied with their lives, with their moral lives, and said, I have to be different, I have to change. And there's a moment where this change is instantaneous. The famous lacrimetta of Bonconte, one of those who repent at the end of his life, and one little tear is enough to be saved. But then purgatory starts. which means that you need a lot of time in order to change. And so this invention of a second world where you are given the time to repent, which means you are given the time to relive your life, to expel the toxins of your organism. I mean, maybe only the modern people. I mean, and our habit of elaborating ourselves can understand the audacity of that invention. Well, you don't go from damnation to salvation in one instant this way. No, you need time to change. And then at a certain point, at the summit of purgatory, you have to forget. When you are immersed in the waters of Lethe, of the river of oblivion, because you cannot, how can I say, always, you know, look at your wrongs and kind of bask in the masochist narcissism of discontent. At a certain point, basta. This is your past. You kind of elaborated your guilt, your sins. Now don't look back. Don't look back and forget about yourself. And these are lessons, if I can say, and these are experiences which I think make Dante so close to us, what we are now, what we are experiencing now in our lives. And there are myriads of other points of contact, which I think is the miracle of the real classic, that it changes under our very eyes according to the questions that we pose and the answers that we receive for that classic.
Okay, well, let's jump past the river of oblivion for this this final clip, because I want to give some time for questions from the audience as well. And let's watch the third clip, which in my mind shows you something extremely interesting that both Rick and Riccardo have done in terms of putting Dante forward. So, possiamo fare la terza clip? Ah, here we go. I've got to say, for my money, that this was, you know, again, I had spoken to Rick, and I had heard that he was going to be using actors, not reenactments, but using actors to actually speak the Dante lines. But, you know, heretofore, I don't know how many of you, when you watch documentaries, you expect to essentially see archival photos and talking heads talking about them. And you know, there's something about Dante, the narrator, the poet, you know, the pilgrim, who's doing all of those things. And what you guys have managed to do, I mean, I think we see a little bit of it here, is to combine all of that by using real actors, talking heads, and then that moment in which you have the actress who plays Beatrice, then we see not Beatrice, but we see the actress now as a talking head.
Well, that's
reciting. I mean, it's a, you know, it's an epiphanic moment. It's.
I find it really, it makes me feel that, you know, I feel like, I don't think I've ever sat in a film that I've been involved in and just cried as I just did. I find the language so moving. And not just the language, the point of the language. And the point of what does it mean to find someone or something beautiful? And to therefore cherish it and want to find value and truth and meaning in it. And the deep, deep, brilliant sincerity of Dante in this poem. Like, no matter what, he sure as hell means what he's talking about, whether you agree with him or not. You cannot ever take that away from him. And I have found that, you know, in the course of working on this film, which I'm so grateful to Riccardo, you, and to Chris for starting this project, has been, you know, an epiphany. Working with these actors, this amazing cohort of actors who came and gave everything, you know, whether it was Fattori Fraser, who's half Scottish, half Florentine girl, grew up in Manchester, you know, went to Oxford, this brilliant, extraordinary human being who just kind of disappeared into into Beatrice. Who the hell can bring Beatrice alive? What is that? I mean, I just feel it's so, and Ricard, and then Antonio Fazzini, but really everyone. And they all found this way of inhabiting, whether they were Mosca di Lamberti, who's the seed of all the Tuscan hills, or, you know, Chaco the glutton, or Ugolino chewing on the Archbishop Ruggiero's head for all eternity. I mean, all of them found a way. They needed very little guidance. They found their way into the specificity of each of these roles. And it was like a theatrical performance that we were, you know, gifted to be there and set up and film. And film in the way that we wanted to, which was always in this way, which you'll see here, which is unfinished entirely. You know, Dante is about the continual interplay of the visible and the invisible. What's happening right now and what we don't know is going to happen later. The consequences of these actions, which have their own kind of invisibility and not only a sort of an afterlife invisibility. And that way in which you can feel the kind of the delicate, fragile connection of each moment as Tori's speaking, you know, look down. Finally, he's able to see this little threshing floor. That's the earth he's seeing down there at the bottom. Yeah. Now he has it in the perspective that from her point of view makes sense, which isn't to say it's not important, but it takes its place in an entire hierarchy of events and consequences that she now knows Dante understands. I mean, that journey, the purgatorial journey, you know, I find just so amazingly moving. And it's essentially the journey that all of us are taking.
A fragment of, you'll allow me, of backstage. Antonio Fazzini, the actor who plays Dante, has been for a long time a friend of mine. And so I'm very proud that I introduced him to Ric. But the choice of Beatrice was a little more controversial. And at first I saw the Provini and I said, this girl, I don't know. And Ric said, no. She's Beatrice, you could see through that she could be a wonderful Beatrice. That's why he is the filmmaker. And looking for the first time myself at a huge screen Beatrice, it's not just the way that she's so beautiful and she utters her verses in such a magnificent way, but she kind of makes sense of all the passages of paradise where Dante insists on the beauty of Beatrice being, let's say, the motor, the engine, which drags him, makes him a rocket from one sky to the other. If you read the text, you know it, and you can imagine. I mean, if you have some imagination, okay, this is a beautiful girl. She becomes more beautiful at every stage, and then you see it. Then you see Tori performing, and that reading experience becomes an emotion. And this has been, for me, the precious gift of this experience, to see how what I have been reading all my life could be translated into an immediate emotion. And not a superficial emotion, but an emotion which would make sense of the text that I had been reading. And seeing her now, it truly makes sense.
She's really,
No, but I think also the way that you guys went through it, this going in and out of focus, this going in and out of the character, with the attention always being on the language. I mean, I've seen a number of dramatic adaptations of Dante over the years, and most of them give up on the text, strangely enough. There are images that they stick with. Romeo Castellucci, an Italian director, did one in the Palace of the Popes in Avignon that had none of the text of Dante, just sort of his images of this. And this, I mean, I think ultimately what this makes me think, and perhaps part of it has to do with English accents and the way we are attracted to it, is it makes you think that these are, you know, the best bits of Shakespeare that you have.
I feel, you know, I mean, as T.S. Eliot famously said, Dante and Shakespeare divide the world between them. There is no third. And, you know, wrote that in 1924, and it's a somewhat, you know, sort of provocative thing to say, but there's a way that that's really true. And you feel in this extraordinarily delicate power of the language, which, I mean, amazingly, English will never be able to do any more than approximations of it, but it does approximations of it. And things like the, you know, the Alan Mandelbaum translation is really a masterful attempt, but there are others. You know, they're all different in their own way. Longfellow's has its own quality in English. Mandelbaum's is really incredible in how much of this, and I say this, by the way, I will now recite all the words I know in Italian. No mezzo del cammino nostra vita. That's it.
Et cetera.
Et cetera. Et cetera. Which, by the way, is
Let's proceed. Let's proceed.
I love it. He actually said that. No mezzo del cammino nostra vita, et cetera. Let's get on. But you know, that's, you know, that, you know, what you can feel is that even if you don't know Italian, you can feel, wow, I don't, you know, something's coming through this language, this set of circumstances, this rhythm of meanings. And, you know, what we found is we found that, you know, film, Dante is so filmic, you know, because film is always about, it's always narrative. So here's a great 14,233 line narrative poem with a beginning and a middle and an end. It's always about a ratio, any film, about what's actually disclosed visually and audibly in a moment, and what's held back, what you can't see.
Well, I'm
And so
guessing
that quality of, like, you know, kind of seeing or racking out of focus or feeling like you can understand some of it, but there's more darkness than there's light. That's because Dante himself was rack focusing, had things in and out of focus, because he was like able to, you know, he knew, I mean, each of the, Riccardo, who's taught me everything I know about Dante, you know, it takes 4 to 5 minutes to read one of the cantos. Boom, it's over. These things are rocketing along.
Yeah.
You know, and so they are so, we go like, well, that's a long poem. It's so compressed, so finely calibrated, always moving on to where it's going, which is to say, like other forms like film, which you can't stop. It's moving forward. It's always about what in this moment is not only being disclosed about the moment, but what are the intimations of what's to come. And you just keep moving, and there is this extraordinary universe that he's invited us into and created. I mean, I just find it, you know, that it hasn't been made. Obviously, it's been the subject of many, many movies and extraordinary novels and poetry itself, you know, Tennyson's Ulysses, not conceivable without the Ulysses from Canto 26.
Dan Brown's Inferno.
Dan Brown's Inferno, like, I mean, but that there hasn't been a documentary film that just takes, you know, takes the ball and runs with it, because he's essentially dying for you to do what Riccardo and Chris wanted us to do, which is like just take it, you know, the first words of our film after this guy gets done are Nel mezzo del cammino nostra vita. And the last words of our film are the love that moves the sun and other stars.
I think there is also special, because naturally this is Dante in translation. Okay, this is Dante in translation.
Right.
I came to think that there is a special romance between my language and the English language. And because I've been asked many times, oh, you know, I mean, well, the translation naturally betrays the original. And I always have to say, okay, naturally you read Anna Karenina in Russian, okay? So if you wait to learn Russian in order to read Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, okay, we'll see you in a few years. But I must say that it's not by chance that almost every year there is an English translation of the Divine Comedy.
There are 107 English translations.
And I know a few translations in French. I know the last translation in Spanish by a friend of mine who teaches in Barcelona. For some reason, and I don't even know, I wouldn't even know how to explain the reason, the English is able to maintain probably the range of the style of Dante. I mean, the French language is a sublime language, but appunto is a sublime language. It's the French translation of Dante tend to a sort of a sublime uniformity, which is the best we can get. But the English, Shakespeare maybe is able to modulate more than other languages the range of Dante's comic style, of Dante's commedia, of Dante's comedy. And I think this is not just my impression, but the fact that we have so many translations in English, much many more than in other languages, in my opinion, means something.
You know, I'm going to be the next person burned at the stake in the Piazza Signorina by enraged Florentines for saying this, but what the hell? You know, I feel if Dante were writing today, he would write in English. Because he would want to write in the lingua franca most understood by most people in the world. And his ambition was that everybody would understand it. And he may or may not feel that English was, you know, a sad fallback from his Italian, but that nevertheless, given the fact that English is the semi-lingua franca of the world, there's no question that even if he wouldn't have originally written it in English, he must, part of him wincing at the translation, be glad that it's now reaching as many people as it can.
Although who
reach.
knows, 700 years from now, the
Who knows?
documentary might be in Chinese. So.
Exactly right.
Sure.
Let me now open it up to you in the audience. Are there any people who would like to ask Rick and Riccardo any questions? I think there's a microphone back here, so raise your hand if you have something that you would like to ask. Oh, yes. Wait a second, we'll get the microphone down here. Alex.
Maybe just to continue on that reflection you were having, the two of you, about English as the language that Dante may have wanted to use for. Dante has played an important role in how Italy sees itself. Are you suggesting Dante could teach the world how it should see itself?
No, I think it was nothing less than his ambition.
Yeah.
I think he wanted, you know,
Yeah.
he's a man of enormous ambition, sustained by considerable pride, one of the sins that he knew he was guilty of. The other one was lust. And, you know, I think, but his sense that there was, that, you know, Lino Pertile, extraordinary scholar, you know, said famously once about Dante that he did not convert people. He wanted to change the world. He did not convert them to the end that he thought. He converted them to his poetry. And at some level, he put everything into that poetry, which I find so moving. Unlike Shakespeare with 37 plays and 154 sonnets and a couple of long poems, it's like he's in Las Vegas and he's betting all his chips on Red 22. It's the comedy. And he put everything he had in that. He had written other things, but this was what he was going to stake his reputation on, and which, while he wanted glory in the afterlife, he also wanted glory in this life. And he wanted it because he wanted it to speak to every man, every woman. Didn't matter how high born you were as a woman, you wouldn't speak Latin. You'd be uneducated. You'd be nowhere. So just that sense that he wants to speak to, it is a centrifugally and ever widening ambit of people. So, you know, before there was an Italian language, there was a Florentine on its way to becoming the Italian language as that diasporic linguistic, you know, eventuality came to pass. So we're now living in the diasporic, you know, cultural eventuality that's come to pass, which we call globalization. He would have wanted his poem to resonate in the context and the currents of that global world. Although maybe you disagree.
I don't know if this is consistent with the question, but we can ask ourselves, who are the addressees of the comedy? And because other poems other poets at the beginning of their poems kind of focus on a certain group of people as the ideal readers. Boccaccio, the women, Petrarch, the people in love. Dante, the only times that he kind of imagines, he says only lector, whoever reads these lines. So it's the most general identification of a potential addressee. And I think he had no intention of discriminating his audience. His audience was the world, lector, whoever you are. It is not determined by sex, by religion, or by level of culture. It's lector, and naturally the fact that he used vernacular is per se an identification of a certain readership, but it's the largest possible readership. It's really and he remains also in our Italian literature the poet who addressed everybody, who wouldn't discriminate among the members of his audience.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? Are there other questions out here? Or oh yes, Ralph.
First of all, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. Of the 107 English translations that you mentioned, could you suggest which ones that mean the most to you?
So I'm working on the 103rd translation as I plowed my way through from, no, I've only read, a couple. Teodolinda Barolini, who's a good friend of Riccardo's, has this remarkable website called Digital Dante, which I commend. Anybody who doesn't know it, rush to it. She's a remarkable scholar, she's sort of groundbreaking scholar. And the two translations that she includes, so in addition to having commentary, footnotes, it's an amazing resource, an extremely navigable resource. It has the entire Divine Comedy, canto by canto, Inferno, Purgatorio, Paradiso, and then in English, so you could read it in Italian, or you can read it in English, and you have two choices. And her choices are Longfellow and Mandelbaum. I don't know enough to know if, she has kind of like, made the right choices. I mean, if there might not be other choices which she should have in that. All I know is that, when the Mandelbaum thing doesn't sound quite right to us, we go to the Longfellow, and it almost always has the thing. So we begin with the Longfellow version, not the Mandelbaum version for the opening few tercets. Most of the time we're with Mandelbaum. So I really recommend kind of plowing your way into these two because they're so instantly, you can just click Mandelbaum, Longfellow and see instantly how line by line by line, these two very different writers, more than a century apart are writing their English translations. And then always, if you know Italian, check it against the sources just right there.
Did you ever read the Pinsky translation of the Inferno?
I did.
Yeah. Did you not like it?
I hate it.
Oh, okay. No, because I'll just put my vote in because I have a microphone too. Pinsky is a very American translation of the Inferno, I think. I think that you could take any one of his stanzas and turn it into a Robert Johnson blues, which may not have anything to do with Dante, but it's.
I don't know what it is.
But,
I find it.
Yeah, but I think we can also go back to what Borges said and described as his experience of reading the Divine Comedy, which it's very comforting for people who don't know Italian. He said that he started to read the Divine Comedy in translation and going back and forth from the translation to the Italian and from the translation to the Italian. And in time, the music of Italian kind of seeped into his mind, and he was able to kind of, let it go and understand what he could. And I think this is an experience that many foreign readers share. And as far as the translations go, I have to confess my partiality, and he knows it for Longfellow, but not just for the translation itself, but for the story, which is behind that translation, which is truly a love story of Longfellow with everything Italian and with our poet. So even now I understand it seems sounds sometimes a little antiquated, but the way he tries to kind of copy, maybe in English, the acoustic curve of the original is in many ways, in my opinion, truly amazing.
Well, in the very beginning, in the middle of the journey of our life.
Of our life, and sometimes even kind of inventing, as far as I read, inventing also some English almost neologisms to really kind of copy the impression, the acoustic impression of the original Italian. But just let's wait for the next one.
Okay,
And then we'll see.
one short question from one of our Zoom audience.
Right, this
here.
is from one of our audiences online. I just wanted to repeat, the website is Digital Dante. Is that
Digital
correct?
Dante, yes.
Digital Dante. This is a question really about some of the visual sources you used, specifically if you looked at any illuminated manuscripts, but maybe you could just say the visual inspirations you may have taken for your film, any representations of Dante. In particular,
Well,
the questioner asks if there were any illuminated manuscripts you used.
Indeed. Riccardo, so imagine the incredible gift to a filmmaking team of having at the core someone with Riccardo Bruscagli's deep immersion in the text, in the manuscripts, in the illuminated manuscripts, and the artwork that's been created, and obviously the artwork that's been generated. Arguably, no text other than the Bible has generated more works of art than Dante has. And, the manuscripts which, Riccardo insisted we film, whether they were Boccaccio's manuscripts in the Lorenziana or the Riccardiana, in the Vatican, in the Lorenziana as well. So we were able to film the original text. It's incredible to have, there's your brutally blunt 21st century camera, 2 millimeters away from a text handwritten, 700 years ago, or hand copied 600 years ago. And so there's a kind of dialogue, I hope, in our film as it becomes finished. And I think it's maybe you see just a small glimpse of it in the version that's been broadcast on RAI. It will be one in which our film way, our cinematic way, kind of is front and center, but then as in very important parts of the story, Botticelli, these stunning illustrations, they really have their own role to play, illustrations in the manuscripts. So this kind of conversation, kind of tacit conversation between ways of visualizing taking place in a kind of an intercourse between our filming and this, just stunning archive of artwork that's kind of gathered around the Divine Comedy.
Well, I can't wait to see the whole thing.
I hope that the viewers of the movie will realize that so many of those images are not just taken from internet, but they are actually filmed in situ on where these men, Rick was mentioning the Botticelli, the famous imbuto of the Inferno by Botticelli, which is photographed and reprinted everywhere. But we were there at the Vatican Library, and we were watching this incredible piece of art. And I hope that when those images come on the screen, it will be visible enough that they are there. They are not just downloaded from the web.
Well, we can't wait. Elizabeth.
Thank you. I think that's a great answer to the question, which is wait for the film to come out and you'll see the inspiration. I want to thank our discussants, our panelists, Jonathan, Rick, and Riccardo. Grazie mille. It's been extremely interesting and a great way to kick off our year. Thank you. To our online audience, thank you for attending. I'm sorry you can't join us on the terrazza, but for those of you who are here, please come share a toast with us. Grazie, buona serata, and good afternoon to those of you overseas. Thank you.